In this lecture, we're going to discuss ethics and ethical misconduct in conducting research with human participants. Remember, there are three main roles for social workers in research, and each of you will find yourself in at least one of these roles at least once in your practitioner career. Even if research is not a career, you will be responsible for incorporating research into your practice as an evidence-based practitioner, collaborating on a research project, disseminating findings, or conducting your own direct research, most often evaluating your own work with clients. This is why becoming familiar with your ethical responsibilities is imperative. You do not want to find yourself in court or losing your license to practice due to an ethical violation. Ethical violations have been prevalent in the past, so we are going to start there, in the past, reviewing some of the worst ethical misconduct in human subjects research. Although ethical misconduct in research has happened often in the past and continues to happen in the 21st century, we are going to highlight some of the most well-known historical incidents in unethical research. The first case presented happened in 20th century Havana, Cuba. Walter Reed, a medical doctor, wanted to test the H1 that yellow fever was transmitted from human to human during contact. He recruited poor immigrants and low-rank army men for this research and told them in his version of an informed consent that they are better off contracting yellow fever in a controlled environment where they can receive medical attention right away. He paid them $100 if they survived and $200 if they contracted yellow fever. What is your opinion about the amount of money paid for participation? Did it cross the line between incentive and coercion? Through this research experiment, Dr. Reed did discover that yellow fever was transmitted to humans from mosquitoes. What are your thoughts? If his discovery saved hundreds of lives, do you view what is ethical a bit differently? Joseph Mengele was known as the Angel of Death and was the head doctor in charge for the Nazi experimentation on Jewish people in concentration camps during the Holocaust. He forced Jewish people, men, women, and children, to be subjects in medical experiments against their will. He, along with Adolf Hitler, wanted to prove the superiority of the Nordic race and believed that all Jewish people should be sterilized. He injected substances into the pupils, trying to find a medical method to change eye color to blue, which was characteristic eye color of Nordic people. He experimented on twins and injected dangerous substances into the uterus of women. 10 million Jewish people died in concentration camps during the Holocaust, and he experimented on 5% of them. Unfortunately, he evaded capture and was never tried as a criminal during the Nuremberg trials. He evaded capture by moving to various countries and changing his name, and eventually died by drowning while swimming. Most of you should be familiar with the Tuskegee experiment, which was perhaps the most well-known medical ethical tragedy that targeted African Americans in the USA. This experimentation took place in Macon County for 40 years and was run by the government. Researchers set out to study syphilis and hypothesized that syphilis manifested itself differently in African Americans than whites. Researchers targeted approximately 600 poor African Americans, mainly sharecroppers, in Alabama who were told they had bad blood. And if they volunteered to participate in the study for bad blood, they could receive free treatment, hot meals, and a warm bed to sleep in. This reward for participation was definitely considered a form of coercion to participate. These people were never told they had syphilis and were never given penicillin, which would have been an effective treatment even after penicillin was invented and available. Take a look at the informed consent form the participants were given. It reads, Dear Sir, some time ago you were given a thorough examination, and since that time we hope you had gotten a great deal of treatment for bad blood. You will now be given your last chance to get a second examination. This examination is a very special one, and after it is finished, you will be given a special treatment if it is believed you are in a condition to stand it. If you want the special examination and treatment, you must meet the nurse at. She will bring you to the Tuskegee Institute Hospital for this free treatment. We will be very busy when these examinations and treatments are being given, and we'll have lots of people to wait on. You will remember that you had to wait for some time when you had your last good examination, and we wish to let you know that because we expect to be so busy, it may be necessary for you to remain in the hospital over one night. If this is necessary, you will be furnished with your meals and a bed, as well the examination and treatment without cost. Remember, this is your last chance for special free treatment. Be sure to meet the nurse. What are your thoughts about this informed consent for participation? How do the researchers use language in a way that contributes to the unethical nature of this study? As a consequence of this study, 100 died of complications from the disease, 28 died from syphilis directly, 40 spouses were infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. This study went on for 40 years. In 1997, people demanded that the federal government be held accountable, so former President Bill Clinton issued a public apology. As a consequence, the government issued free health care to survivors and family members of those impacted by the experimentation, and a memorial was constructed. Many argue that this was not enough to repay those who had suffered this great injustice. Because of this study, many older African Americans are distrustful of both the government and the healthcare system. This study is the reason that many older African Americans avoid going to the doctor, especially if they have government-run healthcare plans, for example, Medicaid, Medicare. Some label this avoidance as paranoia, but others who are familiar with the number of unethical studies using people of color as participants understand that this is a normal reaction to a long history of medical misconduct. Take a look at this example of ethical misconduct, which took place in the mid-1900s. A man named Dr. Stokes was interested in studying the course of viral hepatitis, so he targeted women in prisons to be his involuntary participants. This is another example of social injustice, and you can see a pattern that vulnerable and oppressed groups are being targeted. Geraldo Rivera, a well-known TV reporter, broke this story early in his career. There was a residential school for severely disabled children, and parents were forced to sign their children up for a hepatitis study if they wanted to enroll their child in this school. Dr. Krugman, a doctor at the school, Notice that most kids there contracted hepatitis shortly after enrolling, so he wanted to conduct experiments to learn more about how it was contracted, as well as study antibodies as a way to create immunity from the disease. Over the course of 15 years, several types of experiments took place on the children here, and some children were fed fecal material from hepatitis-positive children. The conditions in the school were appalling, and the reasons why most children contracted this disease was because feces covered the floor and children were left laying on the floor, uncared for, and many times naked, so they would be exposed to the disease from fecal material. This school remained open even after the story broke until 1987. You can take a look at the video that exposed the living conditions at Willowbrook School, which is posted in Blackboard directly below this video lecture link. This is the copy of the informed consent that Dr. Krugman gave to parents who wanted to enroll their children in the Willowbrook School. Imagine you were a parent who was interested in enrolling your child at this school and were given this informed consent by school administrators. What are your thoughts about this informed consent? Those were just a handful of examples of ethical misconduct in research with human participants. Mass exposure of these types of research misconduct led to a wide array of policies on every level designed to protect human participants from unethical research practices. On this slide, you will see some important dates in the development of ethical guidelines in human subject studies. We have learned a lot after all of these ethical injustices in medical research, and both the national and international community have responded to develop protocols to try to prevent any of the injustices we just discussed from happening again. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was developed, named after the Nuremberg trials for Nazi war crimes, and was the first internationally recognized code of ethics in human subjects research. In 1974, this act established the NCPHS and charged them with the responsibility of developing guidelines for human subjects research. After the development of the Nuremberg Code, the United States created the Belmont Report in 1979, which outlines ethical principles and procedures for human subjects research in the United States. In 1985, federal law required universities and colleges to have procedures for 1. Approving research protocols, and 2. Investigating scientific misconduct. These procedures are generally overseen by IRBs, institutional review boards, review research proposals prior to implementation. IRBs are sometimes called CPHS, Committee for the Protection of Human Subjects. These terms are used interchangeably in colleges and universities. As previously mentioned, the Belmont Report was created in the late 1970s. This document outlined 3 ethical principles in human subjects research. They include respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Respect for persons refers to freedom from coercion. This means that any reward offered in exchange for participation must be so large that in its absence, must not be so large that in its absence, a person would choose not to participate. This principle also protects those with diminished cognitive capacity to make the decision to participate and mandates respect for self-determination. Beneficence refers to making an effort to secure participants' well-being, an act of kindness that goes above obligation. Justice refers to ethical theory and asks the question, are those who bear the burden of participating likely to enjoy the benefits of the results? There are two main ethical or social justice theories to consider here: deontological theory and utilitarian theory. According to deontological theory, an action is right or wrong regardless of its consequences. According to utilitarian theory, an action is right or wrong depending on its consequences. Let's discuss an example within this theoretical framework. Let's imagine that Dr. Mengele hid medical documents in his basement, and those documents were uncovered. Imagine that the documents he kept regarding medical experimentation might provide additional knowledge about medical conditions or treatments to the current knowledge base. The question is, should we use the information and research findings in those documents? If you were a deontologist, you would argue that we should not access these documents because the experiments were wrong and unethical in the first place. If you made a utilitarian argument, you would argue that although thousands of people suffered, that the knowledge gained from his experiments could be useful for millions more today, should it lead to greater medical knowledge. How do we transition from conceptual ethical principles to concrete ethical principles? On this slide, you see how each of the ethical principles is concrete. Respect for persons requires that potential participants be given an informed consent. The informed consent must have all of these components you see. All of this information must be provided to the participant in the informed consent document. You must clearly explain why the study is being done, what the person will be required to do, what risk they might experience, and note, there are always risks. Never say there are none. These risks, especially in social work research, are typically emotional or psychological discomfort. The informed consent should also include information about who the person can call should they experience any emotional discomfort. The referral you provide on the informed consent must not be you. This would be a dual relationship. You cannot be their researcher and their mental health provider should they feel discomfort. Typically, find an agency related to your study and provide the name of the agency and phone number for the participant to contact. You must explain that there will be no penalty for withdrawing from the study. You must also explain whether their participation will be either confidential or anonymous. Their participation must be one or the other, not both. Confidential means that you can identify who the responses belong to. Anonymous means that there is no way you, the researcher, will be able to identify individuals with their responses. You must also describe any incentives that you will offer. Incentives are not considered benefits. Normally, there are no direct benefits to participants. The direct benefit is really to our knowledge base and your resume, to be honest. We typically write, although there are no direct benefits to participation, your participation will help generate new knowledge in the XYZ area. Or, your participation will help to develop interventions used to improve XYZ. And informed consent can be either active or passive. Either one is okay, but you must choose the type appropriate for your study. An active informed consent means that the person must sign it and return it to you as an indication of giving permission to participate. A passive consent means that if the participant does not return it to you, they are giving their passive consent to participate. Passive consents are often used in educational settings, public schools, usually for sex education content in health classes. Administrators will send consent forms home, and the form would note, if you do not want your child to participate in the sexual education curriculum in health class, please sign and return this form to your school. If parents don't send the form back, they are indicating that it is okay for their child to participate in that curriculum. Even though all research studies must go through the organization's or university's IRB or CPHS, that doesn't mean that all studies are ethical. In the past, most of the ethical misconduct happened right from the planning phase. However, ethical misconduct today normally happens between the data collection and dissemination phase. Here are some of the ethical misconduct that scientists have self-reported according to a study by Martinson et al., 2005. This is why we must not just read and digest original research studies as truth. We must also be able to use critical thinking to question studies as generalist practitioners. This is because we're supposed to use research to inform our practice as evidence-based practitioners. As we compare and contrast the historical misconduct with research misconduct today, we can see that in the past, most unethical conduct in research began right from the planning phase. In contrast, research misconduct in the 21st century seems to happen the most between the data collection and dissemination phases. The lesson we learn here is that just because a research study gets the stamp of approval from an IRB or CPHS, that doesn't mean we can assume it is ethical from start to finish. The takeaway from this is that no matter which social work research role you are in, a creator, collaborator, or consumer, it is always important to use critical thinking, become familiar with what is required to make a research study ethical, and never be afraid to question our evidence base. This concludes our lecture on research ethics. Please email or stop by with any questions.